So I want to begin this morning's message with a question, just by a survey of folks in the room. Anybody in here a type A personality? If you don't know what that means you're uptight like me, okay? Anybody in here kind of uptight like me? So one of the things I've discovered about being a type A personality is that I'm kind of a person who likes to plan. Anybody in here like to plan? And I really like it when things turn out according to plan. And so I plan lots of things. I got to plan messages. That's just part of being a pastor. Got to plan services. That's also part of being a pastor. I also plan things personally. For example, we have a plan as to where we're going to go and what we're going to do on vacation this summer. We like to plan. I have a plan for retirement because eventually I do want to be able to retire, me and Melody, and have enough money to live on. We have a plan. Not to be morbid about it, but I do have a plan as to what would happen if something were to happen to me, because I want to make sure that everything is taken care of when it comes to my family. I have a plan. And sometimes I'm so uptight about my plans that I not only make a plan, I make a backup plan in case the original plan doesn't work out. Anybody in here ever made a backup plan? Okay, this is how uptight I am. Sometimes I make a backup plan for my backup plan, because I get really concerned that things are not going to turn out according to plan. But one of the things I've discovered about being a very uptight type A personality is that no matter how hard I plan, sometimes something happens where things don't turn out according to plan. No matter how many things I may try to plan for, sometimes something happens that may send my plans and even my life into a detour. So this weekend at Zion, we're kicking off a new series, and the title of the series is called Detour, and this series is all about those moments when your plans don't quite go according to plans, because sometimes things in life happen that are way beyond anything that you could have planned for, and you need to know how to respond. And so for the next few weeks at Zion, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most common things in life that kind of disrupt and turn over our plans. Now, one of the funny things about the common things in life that disrupt and turn over our plans is that they're common. They actually happen to a lot of different people. So if they happen so often, why don't we plan for them? It's because even if they happen to everybody else, these are the things that we always believe will never, ever happen to us. Until they do. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in this series. Now, this weekend, as we kick off this series of different things that can detour our life, today we're going to kick it off by talking about sickness. Because sickness is one of those things that can make a huge mess out of your life in just a flash. I don't know how many times over the course of my ministry I've been called to the hospital to visit someone who wound up there and they didn't plan to be there. But just like that, they had a heart attack. Or just like that, they got into an accident. I don't know how many times over the course of my ministry I've been asked to pray with someone who just got a devastating diagnosis that turned their whole life upside down. Here's the funny thing, the sickness doesn't even need to be major to make a major detour out of your life. For example, you've probably been here before. You're going to work and things are really busy at work. You have like 5 different projects you're working on. They all have deadlines that are today, and you have 6 different meetings you got to go to. This is going to be the day where everything comes together for your company, and then your son wakes up and he's not feeling well because his fever is 101. Anybody ever been there? Be honest, what do you think at that moment? How much Tylenol do I need to get this job done and send him to school? Because if you don't get him to school, things at work are going to go into a major, major detour. In fact, one of the really frustrating things about this detour is that this detour does not discriminate at all. Anybody can get sick at any time. Doesn't matter how old or how young you are, how rich or how poor you are, whether you are male or female, famous or a nobody, anybody can get sick. In fact, one of the biggest news stories over the past few weeks has been that of Princess Kate, the Princess of Wales, who was recently diagnosed with cancer, and her life has been spun into a major detour. Here's what I want to do in our message today. I want to walk through and work through with you a story. We read it a little bit earlier in the service. This story is from 2 Kings chapter 5, and it's the story of a man whose name is Naaman. And Naaman's life is sent into a major detour because of a sickness that he encounters. And so as we walk through and work through this story, I just want to ask, what lessons can we learn from Naaman's detour for our detours if we ever face the detour of sickness? And so here's the story, 2 Kings chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. And I just want to kind of situate you here for just a second. Aram, this was a region that was right to the north of the nation of Israel, kind of the big nation in the Old Testament. It is roughly analogous to today's Syria. And so Naaman was the commander of a big army of a fairly significant country. In fact, he was a great man in the sight of his master, that'd be the king, and he was highly regarded, and here's why. Because through him, the Lord had given all sorts of victories to Aram. And so when we first meet Naaman, he's a very accomplished military commander. He is a very high-ranking military commander. But here's the great thing about Naaman. Naaman, because of his rank, he could have sat behind a desk and just pushed papers for like most of his career. But Naaman was not content to do that. Naaman, even though he was this bigwig in the Aramite military, still knew how to fight a battle. He still knew how to handle a sword. He may have been a commander, but he also wasn't afraid to be a grunt, and so he was a valiant soldier. 2 Kings 5 verse 1 says. In fact, let me do a little bit of technical work here for you. The Old Testament written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for valiant, when it says that he was a valiant soldier, in Hebrew, this is the word hayil, which means strong. In other words, Naaman took his work as a soldier seriously. He wanted to be strong and able on the battlefield, which meant that he worked out like every single day. He drank a lot of protein shakes. He took a lot of supplements. This was a guy who wanted to be ready for duty when duty called. But the story continues in 2 Kings 5 verse 1. He had leprosy. Naaman was sick. Now, in the ancient world, leprosy was one of the most dreaded diseases you could contract. A lot of times we think of leprosy as kind of a skin disease, and that's true. It'll create big old sores on your skin. But it also did a lot of damage to you from within, because leprosy would begin to attack things like your muscles. It would also attack your nerves, so you couldn't feel things. In fact, one of the dangers of contracting leprosy was that you could cut off a finger or a toe. There are real stories about this, that lepers do this, and they don't even know it, because they can't feel it. You could get a puncture wound and not even know it, because you wouldn't be able to feel it. Now, if you're a military commander and if you're a guy who fights battles, not being able to feel things is not a good thing. Because you need to feel when you get stabbed so you don't bleed out and die there on the battlefield. Not only that, because leprosy will attack your muscles, it didn't matter how much or how hard Naaman worked out. Instead of getting stronger every single day, he was only getting weaker. Which meant that this sickness and this disease was going to be career-ending for Naaman. In fact, worse than that, there was no known cure for leprosy in the 9th century BC, which is when Naaman lived, which meant that this disease for Naaman was going to be life-ending. Because eventually and inevitably, leprosy always killed you. Now, this is where Naaman's story begins to get a little bit interesting. Because as Naaman's life is sent onto this giant detour, as Naaman's life is beginning to fall apart, there's this little girl who shows up in the middle of Naaman's story and changes everything about Naaman's story. 2 Kings 5 verse 2, now bands of raiders, these are kind of like commandos. They had gone out from the army of Aram, the army that Naaman is the commander of. And they had taken captive a young girl from their neighbor to the south, from Israel. And she was actually brought back to Aram, and she was forced into servitude in Naaman's household, where she served Naaman's wife. And she hears about Naaman's dreaded disease, verse 3. And she says to her mistress, she says to Mrs. Naaman, if only my master, if only Naaman would go and see the prophet who's in Samaria, and Samaria is a region in Israel, then he would cure him of his leprosy. Now, when you stop to think about this story is amazing. In fact, this girl is amazing, because here's this little girl who has probably been kidnapped from her parents, because she's probably that young. And she's taken into an enemy country where she is forced into servitude in the household of the commander who commands the army that sent commandos to go in and kidnap her. Now, if that was me, if I was kidnapped and drugged to a foreign country, if I was taken hostage in a foreign country, I might be tempted to become a little bit bitter, maybe is a good word for it. Or angry, maybe is a good word for it. In fact, I may be tempted to engage in a little bit of subterfuge, because I'd want to get back at the people who kidnapped me. But this girl's not like that at all. Instead of being bitter, she's concerned about Naaman. Instead of being angry, she's loving toward Naaman. Instead of wanting to commit subterfuge because she's been kidnapped, she wants to help Naaman. In fact, what she says to Mrs. Naaman when she talks to her is amazing. Back to 2 Kings 5, verse 3. She says to Mrs. Naaman, if only my master would go and see the prophet who's in Samaria, who's in Israel. And then what she says next is incredible, because she says, he would cure him of his leprosy. And that word would is an important word to catch, because that word means this statement is a big promise. Because this little girl does not say to Mrs. Naaman, you know what? If Naaman goes and sees this prophet, he might cure him of his leprosy. She doesn't say that. She doesn't say to Mrs. Naaman, you know, if Naaman goes and sees this prophet, he could cure him of his leprosy. She doesn't say that. She says if Naaman goes and sees this prophet, he would cure him of his leprosy. It is a guarantee. I know he'll do it for Naaman. I promise he'll do it for Naaman. That's a big promise from a little girl. Now, it's at this point in the story that Naaman kind of has a decision to make, because here's this little girl who has been taken hostage by his army, and she has just given him some medical advice. And he has to figure out whether or not to follow it. Because if I were in Naaman's shoes, I'd be a little bit concerned and maybe a little bit skeptical. Because, what if she's secretly trying to get back at me? What if she's trying to trick me? What if she's going to send me down to Israel to see this prophet, and he's going to give me a potion that's supposed to heal me but really just kills me? Or what if she sends me down to Israel and there's an ambush waiting for me to get back at me for what I did to her? And besides that, I'm pretty sure that miraculous prophetic healings aren't FDA approved. So I'm not sure this is really going to work, right? But at the same time that Naaman has to be a little bit skeptical, he's also very desperate. Because after all, what else is he going to do? He can't be cured. At least not normally with any medicine they had back then. And so Naaman decides that he's going to go to his boss, to his master, the king, and ask for a little bit of advice. 2 Kings 5, verse 4, Naaman goes to his master, the king of Aram, and he tells him what the girl from Israel had said. And the king starts thinking about this, and he realizes that if we don't try, Naaman's going to die. His best military commander is going to be gone. The leprosy is going to kill him. And so the king of Aram says to Naaman, by all means, you got to go and do this. But then the king decides to try to make it go a little bit smoother and a little bit better, to give it the best possible chance at succeeding. The king of Aram says to Naaman, instead of just going straight to that prophet that girl told you about, go straight to the top. Go to the king of Israel. And I'm going to send a letter to the king of Israel. I want to talk to this king to king, and maybe, apologize for raiding his land and kidnapping a few people. Probably throw that in the letter just to try to, sweeten him up a little bit. And then what the king of Aram does is he decides to try to sweeten the deal even a little bit more, because money always works for that. And so that's what the king of Aram gives to Naaman to take to the king of Israel. He can just kind of slide it under the table as a bit of a bribe. In fact, when Naaman leaves the king's presence, he takes with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. If you put that together in today's currency, that'd be worth about $6 million. Not a bad bribe for just one healing. And so Naaman goes south into enemy territory. And he goes to the king of Israel hoping for the best. But he only gets the worst. 2 Kings 5 verse 7, Naaman gives the king of Israel this letter and tries to slide the bribe under the table. But before the king can even count the money in the bribe, as soon as the king of Israel reads the letter, he tears his robes and he says, "Am I God? I mean, can I really kill somebody, and can I really bring somebody back to life? Can I really heal someone of his leprosy? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy?" I know what he's trying to do. He's trying to trick me and trap me. He's trying to pick a quarrel with me. The king of Israel interprets this move from the king of Aram as a trick and a trap. Because here's what the king of Aram has done. He sent a sick guy to the king of Israel with a bunch of money for a healing that money in the 9th century BC can't buy. Because there's no cure for leprosy. And so the king of Israel is thinking, man, oh man, this guy's trying to start a war with me, because he's going to give me all this money, and then I'm not going to be able to heal his best commander, and he's going to use that as an excuse to come in and attack me. Now, here's the thing. The king of Israel has heard about that prophet that little girl talked about, who's able to do all those miraculous healings. But the king of Israel is smarter than that. He's enlightened, he's modern, he's educated, and he knows that medicine doesn't work by miracles. And so if you want healing from leprosy, you got to get the right medicine. And the king of Israel doesn't have it. And so it's kind of interesting, because we got these two kings who take, well, actually two very different views of miracles and God and healing. On the one hand, we got the king of Aram. And the king of Aram almost has this view that miracles can be bought. They can be bribed. You can get any healing you want to as long as you give somebody enough money to perform it for you. $6 million, is that enough money? But on the other hand, you have the view of the king of Israel, who knows that medicine doesn't really work by miracles. You can't just wave your hand, do a little hocus pocus, and expect somebody to be healed. It doesn't work that way. I mean, that may be nice in ancient miracle stories, but it doesn't work that way in real life. Now, here's what I find so fascinating about these two particular views. Almost 3,000 years since this story has taken place, not much has changed. Because just in general, people hold these same two views. There are some people to this day who believe that miracles of healing can be bought. Most of these people who believe this are on TV at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're saying, hey, just send me enough money and you can get whatever miracle you need. Just support my ministry and you'll be healed. On the other hand, there's a whole group of people who would actually consider themselves to be believers in God. But they don't believe that he does miracles, at least not anymore. Maybe a long time ago in Bible times, but not in the 21st century. In fact, there's a whole theological position known as cessationism that actually teaches this. And cessationism basically says miracles have ceased. And whenever I hear that position, I always kind of scratch my head and I go, well, why would God stop doing miracles? And who told you that he had stopped doing miracles? Let me ask you this. What if both of these kings are wrong? What if God has a way of healing people even in miraculous ways that these kings have not yet considered? Naaman's story continues, 2 Kings 5, verse 8. When Elisha, and here's the name of that prophet that little girl was talking about way back in 2 Kings 5, verse 3. His name is Elisha. He's a man of God, a good and faithful and righteous and credible prophet. And he hears that the king of Israel had torn his robes. And so Elisha sends the king of Israel a message, and here's the message. What's your problem? Why have you torn your robes? What are you worried about? Seriously, don't you believe that God can still heal people miraculously? Here, just have Naaman come to me. I'll take care of him. And so, verse 9, Naaman goes to Elisha's house, this prophet's house, with his horses and his chariots, and he stops at the door of Elisha's house. And the picture here is almost comical, because here's the commander of the army of Aram, and he takes the whole army with him to go to the house of a prophet. He has his horses, his chariots, he has everybody right behind him. Here's what Naaman's essentially doing. He's kind of flexing a little bit. He's saying, look at me. Wherever I go, I got an army that comes behind me because I'm a big deal. I'm a great man. I'm really important. You better heal me. So here's Naaman with the whole army. You know what Elisha is? Not that impressed. 2 Kings 5, verse 10, Elisha sends out a messenger. Elisha sends out a low-level staffer, because Elisha is a little too busy to meet with the commander of the army of Aram. He has better things to do right now. So he sends out a low-level staffer to say to him, all right, if you want to be healed, here's the message from Elisha. Just go wash yourselves 7 times. There's a river right down the road, real famous river in Israel. It's called the Jordan. And if you wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. That's all you got to do for God to come through and miraculously heal you. Sounds simple enough, right? Right? I mean, even if you're a little bit skeptical, would you at least try it? I mean, what do you got to lose? Even if it doesn't work, at least you get a day on the river. You can go tubing and have a good time or something like that. But Naaman doesn't want to try it. But verse 11, Naaman goes away angry. And he says, I thought that this prophet would surely come out to me. Like he sends out a low-level staffer to me. I'm a great man. And I command a great army. And a little piddly prophet from some backwater country won't even come out and greet me and talk to me personally. This guy should have come out and he should have stood in my great presence. And he should have called on the name of the Lord his God and waved his hand over the spot. He should have done the hocus pocus. And he should have cured me of my leprosy. I mean, really, if this is the kind of treatment that I'm going to get from this piddly little prophet, I should have just stayed home. I don't need his help. And besides that, If all I need to do is go wash in a river to be cleansed, guess what? I got rivers at home. I don't need to come down to Israel. Verse 12, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, that's the capital of Aram, aren't they better than all the waters of Israel? Naaman says. Now, by the way, just kind of a little aside here. Naaman isn't necessarily wrong about this. I want to show you a picture. This is from the Jordan River a couple of months earlier. This is from February of this year. Anybody notice something about the Jordan River? Just a little muddy. This happens a lot. So if you wade into that river, you're going to get a mud bath, and that's what Naaman's thinking. Like the rivers in Damascus are nicer and cleaner and purer than that. I don't want to get in there. 2 Kings 5 verse 12, he says, couldn't I just go to my own rivers and be cleansed? And so Naaman turns away and he goes off in a rage. All because he didn't get the healing that he thought he would in the way that he thought he should. Now, it's here where this story gets very relevant for us. Because here's the thing, even if you're not physically sick, everybody needs to be healed from something, right? There's something you want to be healed from. Maybe for you it really is a sickness. Maybe you got that diagnosis of cancer, it's metastasized, and the doctors are doing chemo and radiation, and you're praying to God that you're going to be healed. Maybe you're here this morning and the sickness you're struggling with is like the sickness of a broken heart because somebody has betrayed you, lied to you, hurt you, left you. And you feel like you're falling apart. Maybe for you, it's a sickness in your soul. Maybe you're here this morning and you're struggling with something like depression, and you get up in the morning and it's like there's this dark cloud that's just hanging over your head, and it's like the sun never shines. Whatever it is you need to be healed from, be honest, we all have a way that we kind of want and hope and wish our healings would come. If it's cancer, you kind of hope you're going to go in one day and you're going to get that scan and the cancer is going to be gone. It's going to be amazing. If it's a broken heart, you're kind of hoping that person who hurt you and left you will see the error of their ways and come back to you and even apologize to you, and the two of you can live happily ever after. If it's depression, you're kind of hoping that one day that cloud will lift and the sun will come out and a rainbow will appear in the sky and you will feel just fine. But the reality is this. Sometimes our healings don't happen in the way that we thought they would. They don't come to us in the way that we think they should. And just like Naaman, we're tempted to turn off and go away in a rage. You ever been angry because something didn't happen, a healing didn't come in a way that you really, really wanted it to come? You know, thankfully, at this point in the story, Naaman's friends talk a little bit of good sense into him. 2 Kings 5, verse 13, Naaman's servants, they go to him and they say, my father, let's say that prophet Elisha, let's say he would have told you to do some great thing. Let's say he would have said to you, okay, I need you to go with your army and fight and defeat an army that is 3 times larger than yours. Would you have done that? Of course you would have. You would have been there for the challenge because you're a great man and you believe that you can do great things. And if the prophet would have told you to go and do that and be healed, you would have signed up for it. Now, Naaman, I know this sounds simple and silly and even stupid, but come on. He's just saying wash and be cleansed. Don't you think it's at least worth a try? Verse 14, Naaman tries. He goes down and he dips himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored. and he became clean. Like that of a young boy. He gets his healing. You know, I don't know about you, but I love stories like this in the Bible. But I can also become just a little bit frustrated with stories like this in the Bible. Because they're amazing, but come on, we all know this. Miraculous healings may happen here, but sometimes they don't always happen here. Sometimes the detour of sickness detours our life right into a ditch. And it feels like there's no coming back from it. You know, that's actually one of the reasons that I appreciate this story, because the story is very honest, that not everybody gets a miraculous healing. In fact, this story tells us that right from the very beginning. Back to that little girl and the promise that she makes to Naaman. 2 Kings 5 verse 3, when she goes to Mrs. Naaman, and she says, if only my master would go and see this prophet who's in Samaria. And then I want you to pick up on the pronouns here, because they're very important, okay? She says, he, that would be Elisha, would cure him, that would be Naaman, of his leprosy. And so, there's one man named Elisha. Is Elisha around anymore? Yes or no? No. Who's going to cure one man named Naaman? Is your name Naaman? No. Which means this promise is not for you. The promise that she makes is for one man in one circumstance with one sickness. There's going to be one healing, but it's not for you and it's not for me. Because we are not him and he. So why did I just take 30 minutes to tell you that story, right? Like, why did I waste your time? You know, one of the things that I do find kind of fascinating about this story is this. Naaman's life, when he gets sick, it's sent on like this huge detour, right? Because sickness is always a big detour. But you know, somebody in the story takes an even bigger detour than Naaman. You know who it is? This little girl. Sickness is tragic when it happens. Her kidnapping, hostage taking, that's just brutal. And yet, isn't it amazing? This one little girl makes a huge difference in this story. Even though she had to have been struggling and suffering mightily. I mean, can you imagine how scared she must have been when she was drug out of her house right in front of her parents? Can you imagine how terrified she must have been when she was taken into the household of the commander of an army of an enemy nation to Israel? Can you imagine how much she must have struggled? Can you envision how much she must have suffered? I mean, talk about a detour. And yet, without this girl who was forced into servitude, without this servant who suffered, would Naaman have ever been healed? Nope. She makes all the difference in his life. You see, here's what I love so much about this story. Naaman's healing begins with one little girl who is a suffering servant. You know, about 100 years after the story of Naaman, there's another prophet. His name is not Elisha, his name is Isaiah. And Isaiah writes another story about another suffering servant who does not serve in the household of the commander of the army of Aram, but serves under the command of God himself. And what's amazing about this story that Isaiah writes is that when you read the story of Naaman, right, you got this little suffering servant girl who points Naaman to a prophet who can heal him. But when you get to Isaiah, Isaiah is a prophet who points people to a suffering servant who can heal them. Here's the way Isaiah talks about this suffering servant, God's suffering servant. Isaiah 52 verse 13, God is speaking, and he says, "See, my servant is going to act wisely, and eventually he's going to look like a king. He's going to be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. But before he looks like a king, he's going to have to go through some suffering. And it's going to be bad. There are going to be many who are appalled at him. His appearance is going to become so disfigured that it's going to be beyond that of any human being. His form is going to become so marred that it's going to be beyond that of any human likeness. This guy is going to look like his skin has fallen off. He's going to look like he has leprosy." But this guy's not going to look like that because of some dreaded disease. This guy is going to look like that because of human depravity. Because here's what's going on with this suffering servant. The next chapter, Isaiah 53 verse 5, Isaiah says, "This suffering servant is going to be pierced for human transgressions. He's going to be crushed for human iniquities. In some way, someday, he's going to take the punishment that human sin deserves. But when he takes the punishment, you know what people get? They get the peace." And then here's my favorite line of this prophecy about this suffering servant from Isaiah. "By his wounds," what's the pronoun? We are healed. You want to know where the promise of healing is? It's right there. Because this time the pronoun is not him, it's not he, it's we. And I got to tell you, this healing by this suffering servant is so much better than even the healing that Naaman gets, as miraculous as it is. Because this isn't just a healing from a dreaded disease. This is a healing from the source of every dreaded disease. This is a healing from iniquity. This is a healing from transgression. This is a healing from sin. And this is a healing that is truly promised to you and to me. Because of a man who gave his life on Calvary. You need a healing? There's your healing. You know, when Naaman got sick, it sent his life into a big detour. When this girl got taken hostage, it sent her life into an even bigger detour. But the biggest detour in all of history was a detour that a servant took from heaven to earth to die, to give his life, to struggle and suffer on a cross. But that detour was pretty good now, wasn't it? In fact, I'll let you in on a little secret. That detour wasn't a detour at all. It was all part of the plan. So, I'll leave you with this question. What if your detour, whatever detour you're facing right now, whether it's sickness or something else, what if your detour can be used as part of God's plan? What if your detour is actually divine? Here's my encouragement. Just give it a little time. Because God has the map. And He can and will see you to your destination. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, life has a way of throwing all sorts of things at us that we could never, ever hope to plan for. Maybe if we're struggling with sickness right now, we're in need of healing. And I pray for miraculous healing. But I also give you thanks and praise that even if we don't get the healing that we may not think we would in the way that we think we should, we have a healing that is promised. One that comes through your suffering servant. He heals us from sin, from death, and the devil. We thank you for that. And that's why we pray in His name. In the name of Jesus. Amen.